At my family's gala in Annapolis, my father, an admiral, snatched my glass of wine and roared for everyone to hear. "Stop disgracing the family! This legacy belongs to your sister." My mother leaned in, her whisper like ice. Such a disgrace. They thought they were burying me that night. They didn't know the disgrace they created would become my weapon. My name is Hannah Cole. I'm 37 years old, and for 15 of those years I served as a combat operations officer in the United States Navy. Tonight, however, I was just a ghost haunting my own family home. The air in the grand hall of the Cole family residence in Annapolis was stifling, thick with the scent of old money, polished mahogany, and expensive bourbon. It was a familiar scent, the aroma of a legacy I was born into but never truly a part of. From a secluded corner, I watched the calculated pageantry unfold. Men in crisp suits, their wives in elegant dresses, all orbiting my father, the retired Admiral Donovan Cole. Their laughter was a little too loud, their smiles a little too bright. It was a performance, and I was the only one without a script. No one spoke to me. They offered polite, distant nods, their eyes sliding past me as if I were just another piece of ornate, slightly out-of-place furniture. I found a small, unoccupied table and ate a Maryland crab cake. The sharp, savory taste of Old Bay spice, doing nothing to cut through the bitterness rising in my throat. I felt the silent judgment from the walls themselves, from the oil-painted portraits of Cole men in their naval dress uniforms, their gazes stern and unforgiving. They were the architects of this dynasty. I was merely a footnote they wished they could erase. My father took his place at the center of the room, tapping a crystal glass for attention. The chatter died instantly. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice the familiar baritone of command. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate family." His eyes scanned the room, landing on my younger sister, Serafina. A genuine, brilliant smile lit up his face. And the shining jewel of this family, my daughter, Serafina. He spoke of her accomplishments as a celebrated chef, her upcoming restaurant, her perfect life. She was, he declared, the true embodiment of the Cole spirit. He never once glanced in my direction. It was as if I didn't exist. Then Rear Admiral Thompson, a newly retired friend of my father's, clapped him on the shoulder. "A fine girl, Donovan, a fine girl. And what about your other daughter? What is Hannah up to these days?" A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of annoyance crossed my father's face before it was smoothed away. "Ah, Hannah," he said, his voice casual, dismissive. "Hannah is pursuing personal projects, a noble little venture with some boats, I believe. A quiet life after she was unable to continue her naval career." The lie hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at my heart, unable to continue. 15 years of service, of deployments, of sacrifices I could never speak of, all erased with a single careless phrase. I looked at my mother, Eleanor, standing beside him. She gave a serene, unwavering smile and a slight nod of agreement, her loyalty to his narrative absolute. The hurt was a physical thing, a knot tightening in my chest. I swallowed it down, my training kicking in. Maintain composure, duty calls. The polite thing to do was to congratulate my sister. I stood and began to walk toward her, a plastic smile fixed on my face. I never made it. My father stepped into my path, his body blocking me. His hand clamped down on my wrist, his grip far stronger than necessary, a grip designed to hurt, to control. He leaned in, his voice no longer the charming host's, but a low growl of pure contempt. He snatched the wineglass from my other hand. "That's enough," he hissed, just loud enough for the circle of guests nearest to us to hear, their smiles freezing on their faces. "Stop embarrassing this family. This legacy belongs to Serafina. Don't you understand?" The red wine in his glass sloshed, a tiny, violent storm mirroring the chaos erupting inside me. The public humiliation was a branding iron against my skin. Then came the final killing blow. My mother glided to his side. She didn't look at me. Instead, her gaze fixed on the lapel of my dress as if she'd spotted a stain. She reached out, but not to comfort. Her fingers were rough as she aggressively straightened the fabric. "You have disappointed your father," she whispered, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. "You are a disgrace to this family." The whisper was more devastating than the shout. It was the verdict, the final confirmation of my worthlessness, co-signed by the two people who were supposed to be my safe harbor. I stood there, frozen, in the crossfire of curious and pitying stares. I didn't cry. A soldier is trained not to show emotion. I simply felt a cold, hollow space where my heart used to be. The words of the Serenity Prayer echoed faintly in my mind, a lifeline I couldn't quite grasp. "God, grant me the serenity." Gently, I pulled my wrist from my father's grasp. I turned, my back straight, my head held high, and walked away from the circle of light and laughter that was never meant for me. My steps were steady on the cold marble floor, each one a measured, disciplined retreat. But inside, my world had just been shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. As I walked toward the door, all I could see in my mind's eye was the wall of honor back in my father's study, filled with the achievements of generations of coalmen, and the one gaping, empty space where my name was supposed to be. The drive back to my small apartment was a blur of headlights and shadows. My hands were steady on the wheel, my posture erect, but inside, the ghost of my father's words and my mother's whisper played on a loop. The image that haunted me most, the one that had followed me since childhood, was of the wall of honor in my father's study. It wasn't a wall, it was a map of my family's expectations, and on that map, I was a blank space. The first time I truly understood this, I was 16. I came home from the state marksmanship competition, the heavy gold-plated medal cool against my palm. I had outshot every boy and girl there. I was a state champion. I presented it to my father, my chest swelling with a pride I was desperate for him to share. He took the medal, weighed it in his hand, and gave a single, non-committal nod. "Good, Hannah, very precise." Then he turned and carefully hung a framed photograph of Serafina on the most prominent spot on the wall. She was in a delicate white dress, her hands poised gracefully over the keys of a grand piano after winning a regional competition. "This is more elegant, Hannah," he said, adjusting the frame until it was perfectly level. The Cole legacy requires elegance. Elegance? That was the word. My achievements, the ones earned through sweat, discipline, and gunpowder, were never elegant. They were the wrong kind of excellent. It was a lesson I would learn again and again. The memory shifted, fast-forwarding to a Thanksgiving several years ago. I was 30, a lieutenant commander, fresh off a 6-month deployment in the Middle East. I had come home expecting, if not a hero's welcome, then at least a warm one. Instead, as the guests arrived, my mother pulled me aside. "Hannah, dear, be a help and clear the coats, would you?" she'd said, while Serafina and her wealthy fiancé were paraded around, holding court with senators and their wives. I did as I was told, swallowing my disappointment. But the true humiliation came at dinner. The main dining table, set with the family's finest silver and china, was full. My mother, scanning the seating arrangement with a practiced eye, looked at me without a hint of shame. "Hannah," she announced brightly, "there's a spot for you over there with the little ones." The little ones' table, the kids' table. I, a commanding officer in the U.S. Navy, was seated on a folding chair between a 9-year-old nephew who was building a fort out of mashed potatoes and a 12-year-old niece glued to her phone. Across the room, I watched my family raise their crystal goblets to toast Serafina's real achievements. The clinking of their glasses sounded like a death knell to my self-worth. Even my proudest day was stolen from me, my graduation from the Naval Academy. The air in Annapolis was thick with promise that day. I stood in my crisp dress whites, a commission in hand, a future of service ahead of me. My parents were there, of course, but their attention was not on the parade ground. It was on a glossy copy of Bon Appetit magazine, which featured a multi-page spread on Serafina's innovative culinary artistry. As my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I glanced down into the sea of proud families. My father was on his cell phone, pacing. My mother was pointing out a picture in the magazine to a friend. My moment of glory, the culmination of 4 years of relentless effort, had become background noise for my sister's success. My existence was simply not as important. The most painful memory, though, was the quietest one. It was a call from a satellite phone in a hostile zone. The one call I was allowed that month. The connection was poor, the air around me tense with unspoken danger. I just needed to hear a familiar voice, a word of encouragement. My mother answered, her voice rushed and distracted. "Hannah, is everything all right? I'm in the middle of planning Serafina's engagement party. Is this important? Is this important?" I was surrounded by the constant threat of death, and she was asking if my call was important. "Everything is fine here, Mom," I'd said, the lie tasting like ash. "Oh, good. Well, you know how it is. Everything is just wonderful here." Their wonderful did not include my safety. My world of life and death stakes, of split-second decisions, and loyalties forged in fire simply did not exist in their perfect, polished universe. Pain is mandatory, a drill instructor once barked at me at Quantico. But suffering is a choice. For years, I had chosen to suffer in silence, hoping one day they would see me. Now, driving through the dark, I understood that day would never come. But then, through the fog of painful memories, one single clear image emerged. My uncle, Rear Admiral Franklin Cole, my father's younger brother. He was a quiet, thoughtful man, the only one who ever seemed to look at me instead of through me. After I'd returned from my first deployment, he had taken me aside, away from the family fanfare. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze steady and kind. "What you do out there, Hannah," he'd said, his voice low and sincere. "Not everyone can do it. You be proud of that, even when no one else is." That single sentence, that one moment of pure, unadulterated recognition, had been the anchor that kept my self-respect from sinking completely into the dark ocean of their disapproval. It was a faint light, but it was enough to navigate by. I pulled into the parking spot of my cheap apartment complex, the engine humming before I cut it. The ghosts of the past swirled around me. The memory of my uncle's words gave me a flicker of strength, but the weight of all the other memories was crushing. A choice, the drill instructor had said. I had to make a choice. If their approval is something I can never have, then what am I supposed to live for? My new life began with the sunrise, over the Chesapeake Bay and the smell of cheap, strong coffee mixed with salt and damp wood. I lived and worked out of a rundown sailboat I'd named the Resolute. It was more of a vow than a name. My office was the small galley table, my bed was a narrow bunk, and my mornings were spent staring at a ledger filled with mocking bright red numbers. The Chesapeake Bay Watchers program, my answer to the question of what to live for, was sinking financially. The contrast between this life and my old one was a bitter pill I swallowed every morning. I had gone from strategic planning meetings in the command center of a guided missile destroyer to bartending 4 nights a week at a noisy dockside tavern just to afford new ropes and engine parts. But as Theodore Roosevelt once said, the credit belongs to the one who is actually in the arena. I was in the arena now, tired, broke, and alone, but in it. I refused to let myself fall. My current mission was a group of at-risk teenagers, and today's crew was particularly challenging. Their self-appointed leader was Leo, a 16-year-old with defiance in his eyes and a chip on his shoulder the size of an anchor. He was the son of a fallen soldier, a boy drowning in a grief that had curdled into anger. He sized me up as I demonstrated a basic knot. "You're gonna teach us to sail?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You look like some unemployed soccer mom." His friends snickered. The old Hannah, the one desperate for approval, would have flinched. The naval officer, however, remained calm. I simply coiled a short length of rope and tossed it to him. "Then prove me wrong," I said, my voice even. "Tie a figure-8 knot on a bight." My training had taught me that you don't fight chaos with chaos. You meet it with unflinching competence. The day wore on, a slow battle of wills. Then my phone rang, the ringtone a jarring interruption. It was my mother. A tiny, stupid flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe she was calling to check in. Maybe. The hope died as soon as she spoke. "Hannah," she began, her tone crisp and imperious. "Mrs. Vanderbilt just called me. She's complaining about those unsightly old boats of yours, anchored near their yacht club. They're an eyesore. Can you move them? We can't be bothering important people." Not a single question about how I was. My life's work, my purpose, reduced to an unsightly nuisance that was bothering her wealthy friends. All the air went out of my lungs. "Yes, Mother," I said, my voice flat. I hung up, the weight of a familiar, bone-deep exhaustion settling over me. Later that afternoon, the sky turned a bruised purple. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping across the bay in violent gusts. The Resolute heaved, its old timbers groaning in protest. The kids panicked. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed fear. Leo, the boy who had mocked me, stood frozen at the helm, his face pale. This was my element. In the heart of the storm, I was home. "Leo, eyes on me," I barked, my voice cutting through the wind's howl. It was the voice of command, a voice that expected to be obeyed. "Take the helm, steer into the wind, now." My orders were sharp, precise, and clear. I directed the others, telling them which lines to tighten, which sails to reef. Fear gave way to focus. Under my command, the chaos became a coordinated effort. Leo, his hands trembling at first, followed my instructions, his knuckles white on the wheel. He wasn't just steering a boat, he was steering through his own fear, and he was winning. When we finally guided the battered sailboat back to the safety of the dock, the adrenaline subsided, leaving a quiet calm. The kids were silent, their earlier defiance replaced with a new profound respect. Leo turned to me, his gaze no longer challenging but humbled. He swallowed hard. "Thanks, Lieutenant Commander," he mumbled. It was the first time anyone had called me by my rank, with genuine respect since I'd left the Navy. Not with pity, not with disdain, but with the earned reverence of a subordinate to his commanding officer. It hit me with the force of a rogue wave. I looked at the boy, this tough, broken kid who had just found a piece of himself out on the water, and a real warm smile spread across my face. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a quiet, solid pride that had nothing to do with my family or their approval. In that moment, standing on the deck of my rundown boat with a crew of misfit kids, I knew this difficult, lonely path was worth it. I was building my own legacy. Maybe legacy isn't something carved in marble, but the mark you leave on another soul. Just when I thought my world had shrunk to the confines of my lonely boat, it began to open up in ways I never expected. It started with a man who showed up at the docks unannounced, holding a reporter's notebook and a pen. His name was Elias Vance, and his press credentials said The Washington Post. I expected a quick, superficial interview. What I got was a witness. Elias didn't just ask questions, he watched. He spent the entire day with me, a silent observer. He saw me wrestle with a stubborn, grease-covered engine. He saw me patiently coax a shy 15-year-old girl into reading a nautical chart. He saw me stand my ground calmly and firmly. When the harbor master tried to bully me about docking fees, he didn't see an unemployed soccer mom. He saw a commanding officer running a different kind of operation, a campaign to salvage lost souls. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. The true surprise came that evening. I returned to the Resolute, exhausted and bone-weary after a long day, to find a heavy pot waiting for me on the deck. I lifted the lid, and the rich, creamy aroma of New England clam chowder filled the air. Beside it was a loaf of freshly baked sourdough bread, still warm. It was from Mrs. Rossi, the owner of a small diner down the pier, whose grandson was in my program. Tucked under the pot was a handwritten note on a slip of paper. It simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on my boy." I stared at the note, at the steam rising from the soup, and something inside me that had been frozen for years finally broke. I sat down on the deck and cried. Not silent, disciplined tears, but heaving, gut-wrenching sobs. It was a simple act of kindness from a near stranger, but it felt more like love than anything I had received from my own mother in a decade. It was the food of working-class people, people who had little but gave so much, and I realized then that dignity had nothing to do with a bank account or a rank on your collar. It was about kindness and loyalty. As if the universe had decided I'd been alone long enough, another ghost from my past appeared the next day. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reyes, my former chief engineer on the destroyer, stood on the dock, a duffel bag at his feet. After retiring, he'd heard through the grapevine what I was doing and had driven 6 hours from Norfolk to find me. He took one look at the collection of aging, temperamental engines I was trying to keep alive, his gaze sweeping over the rust and frayed wires. He shook his head slowly. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice the same calm, capable rumble I remembered from the engine room. "This setup is a goddamn tragedy. Let me take a look." No long-winded questions about what had happened, no pity. Just the quiet, efficient loyalty of a true soldier. He rolled up his sleeves, pulled a set of wrenches from his bag, and got to work. In that moment, the loneliness that had been my constant companion felt a little less suffocating. That evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the Chesapeake sky, Elias sat with me on the deck, He spread a few documents out between us. "Your discharge papers are unusual, Hannah," he said, his journalistic curiosity now mixed with genuine concern. "They've been sealed at a level that makes no sense for a standard honorable discharge. It smells like a cover-up." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Have you ever heard of the Fat Leonard scandal? A defense contractor who bought off high-ranking naval officers with cash parties and prostitutes." I nodded. Every officer knew the name. It was a stain on the Navy's honor. "I think you saw something," Elias theorized, his eyes holding mine. "Or knew something they didn't want you to talk about. And I think they sacrificed you to keep it quiet." It was a lightning bolt. For years, I had internalized the narrative that I was the failure. For the first time, someone was suggesting that I wasn't the problem, I was the victim. Someone not only believed me, but had a logical, terrifying explanation for what had happened to my career. Later that night, the three of us, me, Elias, and Mark, sat on the deck of the Resolute. We weren't eating filet mignon or drinking vintage wine. We were sharing Mrs. Rossi's chowder out of mismatched bowls and drinking cheap beer from a can. But there, surrounded by the quiet loyalty of my old comrade and the fierce intelligence of my new one, I felt a sense of peace and belonging that I had never once felt in the opulent halls of the Cole mansion. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a crew, a chosen family forged not by blood, but by respect and a shared sense of purpose. As Mark went below deck to check on an engine repair, Elias turned to me. "Hannah, your story is more than just about these kids," he said, his voice serious. "There's something bigger here, and I think it has something to do with a defense contractor named Julian Croft. I want to invite you to an event on his yacht. It's time to stop running from your past and start investigating it." The invitation was a summons, a calculated move in a game I was just beginning to understand. Stepping with Elias onto the gangplank of the SY Odyssey, I felt a tactical unease settle in my gut. The yacht wasn't just luxurious, it was a floating fortress of wealth, designed to impress and intimidate. Teak decks gleamed under soft lighting, waiters circulated with trays of crystal champagne flutes, and the gentle strains of a string quartet drifted on the sea breeze. I felt instantly out of place in my simple black dress, a soldier trespassing in a palace of deceit. Our host, Julian Croft, materialized before us. He was precisely as Elias's files had described him, a man with a predator's smile, all polished surfaces and cold, empty eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," he purred, taking my hand. His grip was firm, a display of power, but his skin felt strangely lifeless. "A pleasure. Your father has told me so much about your, passions." The slight pause, the subtle emphasis. It was a masterclass in veiled insult. He was telling me he knew exactly who I was. The family disappointment. Before I could respond, my own family appeared, their timing perfect, their smiles bright and brittle. They were not cold this time. They were worse. They were friendly. My mother took my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep. "Hannah, just be charming for a few hours," she whispered urgently, her eyes darting toward Croft. "Croft Dynamics is a very important partner. Seraphina's future depends on this." My father then stepped forward, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Think of it as a mission, daughter," he said with a strained heartiness. "Serve your purpose." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. I wasn't a guest, I was a prop. A pawn brought here to complete a picture of Cole family unity, all to smooth a business deal. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just neglect. This was active, calculated use. "Identify the threat," A voice from my training whispered in my head, "Assess, neutralize." Later, Croft cornered me near the railing as I stared out at the dark water. He held a glass of 25-year-old single malt scotch. He offered me one. I declined. "I hear you were a brilliant commanding officer," he began, swirling the amber liquid. "A true warrior, but you chose a different path. Sometimes the most difficult decisions are the right ones, for everyone involved." His words were silk-wrapped threats, a casual reminder of his power. He was probing, testing my reaction. I met his gaze and held it, my face a mask of neutrality, my mind a tactical map, recording every detail. At dinner, the pretense reached its peak. Serafina, glowing, spoke of her plans to open a new restaurant in Dubai, a project bankrolled by Croft. To flatter their benefactor, my father launched into a grand story about naval history. Croft cut him off with a loud, braying laugh. "Ah, the Navy," he boomed, his voice carrying across the table. "So many secrets. It's like all those ghost ships you hear about, the ones that just vanish without a trace." He said it with a casual, chilling arrogance. My blood ran cold. He was joking about ghost ships while we were sitting on one. Across the polished table, Elias caught my eye. He knew. We both knew. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. As a magician was brought out for post-dinner entertainment, I saw my chance. "Excuse me," I murmured, feigning a need for the restroom. I slipped away from the laughter and applause, heading not for the guest quarters, but for the service corridors below deck. The air grew cooler, the scent of fresh paint, failing to mask the faint metallic tang of rust underneath. The opulence of the upper decks was a thin veneer over something old and decaying. I moved with purpose, my heels clicking on the metal flooring. My eyes scanned the bulkheads, searching for something I'd noticed on a blueprint Elias had shown me. A small emergency control panel with a slightly scratched surface near its identification plate. I found it tucked away behind a stack of linen carts. My heart pounded against my ribs. Looking both ways down the empty corridor, I knelt. My hand was steady as I used my fingernail to scrape at the thick, glossy white paint covering the plate. It flaked away, revealing the faint, stamped letters and numbers beneath. N377DDG. The world stopped. Time, sound, breath. All of it ceased to exist. N377DDG. It was the hull number, the official designation for the USS Acheron, the guided missile destroyer commanded by my father's mentor, Admiral Patterson, a man he called a brother. The ship that had reportedly vanished in a tragic training accident off the coast of Virginia 6 years ago, taking its entire crew of over 300 sailors with it. In that silent, sterile corridor, the horrifying truth crashed down on me with the force of a tidal wave. This wasn't a cover-up. It wasn't a business deal. This was a mass grave. This wasn't a yacht. It's a repainted tomb. And someone has to pay. Kneeling in that sterile service corridor, the steel deck felt like it was pitching beneath me, not from the motion of the sea, but from the violent lurch of my own reality. N377DG. The numbers were burned into my mind, a brand of horrifying truth. The USS Acheron, memories of its commander, Captain Miller, flooded back in a painful, vivid rush. He was my father's mentor, a legend in the Navy, a man whose integrity was as solid as the hull of a battleship. His death and the loss of his entire crew of over 300 sailors had been reported as a tragic training accident. A lie, a monstrous, unforgivable lie. The ship hadn't sunk. It had been stolen, its identity stripped, its steel skin slathered in the white paint of luxury. It had been turned into a floating palace, a pleasure craft for the corrupt and powerful. The initial shock, cold and sharp as a shard of ice in my heart, quickly began to melt, replaced by the heat of a rising molten fury. It was a cold, hard rage, an operational fury I hadn't felt since I was on the front lines. Staring down an enemy who needed to be neutralized, I forced myself to stand, my movements stiff, robotic. My training screamed at me, "Maintain composure, do not reveal your discovery." I had to get back to the party. I had to act normal. Walking back onto the upper deck was like surfacing from a deep, dark dive into a world of blinding artificial light. I smoothed down the fabric of my dress, my hands trembling slightly before I willed them still. I needed to appear calm, unbothered. I walked past the cigar lounge, its open doors spilling thick, aromatic smoke, and the low rumble of powerful men's voices into the night air. And then I heard it, a sound that stopped me dead. My father's voice, low and conspiratorial, stripped of all its public charm. "The past is best left buried, Julian," he was saying, his tone dripping with cold pragmatism. "As long as it provides for a bright future for Serafina and this family." Croft let out a low, satisfied chuckle. "Of course, Admiral, a legacy must be nurtured, after all." My heart didn't just break. It felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, the air forced from my lungs. My father didn't just know about this atrocity, he had agreed to it. He had sanctioned it with his silence. He had traded the truth, the honor of his men, and the lives of an entire ship's crew for his favored daughter's restaurant, and the family's continued social standing. The last line of defense in my soul, the final, desperate, childish hope that he was merely ignorant, was obliterated. This was my breaking point. I fled to my assigned guest cabin, the small, opulent room feeling like a prison cell. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the suffocating silence pressing in on me, and then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to be coming from inside the wall, a phantom sound in the deep quiet of the ship. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. It wasn't a real sound, of course. My rational mind knew that. It was the echo of a scream I could feel in my bones, the ghost of a warning from the souls trapped within this steel tomb. It was the desperate cry of over 300 sailors whose final resting place had been desecrated, turned into a rich man's playground. Driven by an impulse I didn't understand, a need for tangible proof of the evil I felt, I dropped to my knees and peered under the heavy, custom-made bed frame. There, scratched crudely into the metal, almost invisible in the gloom, were 2 words, "They know." Someone before me. Someone else had been on this ship, had discovered the truth, and had tried to leave a warning. They had been silenced. I would not be. There was no more hesitation, no more doubt. The pain was gone, burned away by a cold, clear purpose. I pulled out the encrypted satellite phone Elias had given me, its weight a comfort in my hand. My fingers were steady as I dialed the number for Mark Reyes. "Mark, it's me, Hannah. What's your location?" My voice was not the voice of a broken daughter. It was the voice of a commanding officer. It was sharp, cold, and decisive. "I'm in Norfolk, Lieutenant Commander. What's wrong?" His voice was an anchor of steadfast competence in my swirling chaos. "I'm on a ghost ship off the Virginia Capes," I said, my words clipped and precise. "I need you, and I need you to bring your best kit. We have a job to do." I offered no further explanation. I didn't need to. With the unwavering, unquestioning trust of a soldier for his CO, Mark's reply was instantaneous. "Roger that, LC. Send me your coordinates." After ending the call, I stood and walked to the cabin's large porthole window. I stared at my own reflection in the dark glass, a silhouette against the faint lights of the distant shore. I no longer saw a victim. I saw a warrior. The woman my father had tried to erase was gone, and in her place was a United States naval officer. I remembered the oath I took when I was commissioned, the same oath my father took to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I finally, truly understood who the enemy was. He was right here, on this ship, wearing my father's face. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, or would you have done what I did? I whispered a vow into the darkness, a promise sealed by rage and grief. Father taught me about honor. Now I'm going to teach him about consequences. My war had just begun. The art of war teaches that all warfare is based on deception. For the next 12 hours, I would have to be the most convincing actor on this floating stage of lies. My mission had begun. As a squall moved in from the Atlantic, conveniently providing cover, I made my way to a prearranged service hatch on the lowest deck. The wind howled and the rain lashed against the hull, masking the sound of the approaching high-speed Zodiac. Mark Reyes, clad in black from head to toe, came aboard with the quiet efficiency of a shadow. I led him through the labyrinthine service corridors to the engine room, the one place on the yacht I knew was free of surveillance cameras. The heat and noise made them unreliable. The moment we entered the thrumming metallic heart of the ship, Mark stopped. He didn't look at the custom-painted housings or the polished chrome fittings. He looked past them, at the bones of the machine. He placed a hand on a massive generator housing, his eyes scanning the layout of the pipes, the electrical conduits, the very architecture of the space. "This is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer's power plant," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the engine's roar. "No doubt about it. They just gave her a pretty dress, Lieutenant Commander. But the skeleton is still Navy." His words were the final confirmation I needed. The cold fury in my gut solidified into an icy, unshakable resolve. We found Elias in his cabin, where he had been poring over financial records and personnel files on a heavily encrypted laptop. The three of us formed an impromptu command cell. Sun Tzu wrote, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles." Elias was our intelligence officer, laying out the enemy's structure, a web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and political connections that protected Julian Croft. Mark was our technical operations expert, his mind a living blueprint of the ship's systems, and I was the commander. "Our objective is the original voyage data recorder," I stated, my voice crisp and low. "The VDR, the Acheron's black box. It's the only piece of evidence that can't be disputed or buried. It will contain the ship's final moments, the audio from the bridge, everything." Mark nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. On a DDG, the VDR is housed in a hardened casing, usually in a secure compartment near the ship's central command. On a civilian refit like this, Croft would want it close but hidden. He pulled up a schematic of the yacht on a tablet. "I think I know where." Our target was a converted storage compartment located behind Croft's private entertainment lounge, a room I knew he pompously referred to as his trophy room. Getting there would be a risk, but it was one we had to take. We moved under the cover of the late-night crew change. The corridors were quiet. As we reached the lounge, my stomach tightened. The room was a shrine to Croft's ego, but it was also a desecration of naval history. Displayed on the walls like hunting trophies were authentic naval artifacts. A ship's bell from a World War II battleship, a vintage officer's sword, and in the most prominent position, a large folded American flag in a gleaming mahogany display case. The small brass plaque beneath it read, "Recovered from the USS Acheron." A wave of revulsion washed over me. Croft wasn't just hiding his crime, he was celebrating it, using the very symbol of our nation's honor as a decorative piece in his monument to greed. Mark got to work. He didn't need explosives or brute force. His tools were a set of specialized electronic picks and a bypass device. He knelt before a seamless-looking panel in the wall, his movements precise and economical. A few soft clicks, a low electronic hum, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a small, dark, dusty space. And there it was, a bright orange hardened metal box, sitting silently on a shelf. The VDR. It was intact. Mark pulled a portable data reader from his kit and carefully connected a cable to the VDR's interface port. The small screen flickered to life, displaying lines of encrypted file directories. "We got it," Mark whispered, a note of awe in his voice. "The raw data is here, but cracking this encryption and copying the files will take time and a lot more processing power than I have here." We carefully removed the VDR, concealing it in Mark's duffel bag, and made our way back to my cabin. The weight of the box felt like the weight of 300 souls. We had the weapon. Now we needed to build the missile. Just as we closed the cabin door, a soft but firm knock sounded. My blood ran cold. We froze. Elias moved to the door, peering through the peephole. He gave me a surprised, questioning look before opening it a crack. Standing in the hallway was Ensign Avery Park, a young cyber warfare specialist I'd noticed among the yacht's technical crew. I'd seen her at the party, her eyes sharp and intelligent, taking in everything, missing nothing. She was a recent Naval Academy graduate, with a reputation for being brilliant and fiercely principled. She looked past Elias, directly at me. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, her voice low and steady. "I registered an anomalous power draw from this cabin when you weren't here, and a systems access request to the ship's archives from Mr. Vance's terminal. I know this isn't a yacht, and I want to help." She was taking an incredible risk, putting her entire career on the line. She was the final piece of the puzzle we didn't even know we were missing. Avery was our key to a system more powerful than Mark's portable rig. The four of us now stood in the cramped cabin, a silent alliance forged in the face of an immense crime. We had the evidence, we had the technical expertise, we had the plan. Avery could slice through the yacht's internal network, giving us control of the audio-visual systems. Mark could ensure the VDR data was decoded and ready. Elias would open a secure live channel to a trusted contact at the Naval Investigative Command, and I would give the order. Elias looked at each of us, his face grim with the weight of our decision. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We only get one shot to expose this. The show goes on at tomorrow night's gala." The final gala aboard the Odyssey was the grandest yet. A black tie affair designed to celebrate the unholy union of Croft Dynamics and my family's name. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, a ghost in a simple black dress, my face a mask of serene calm. My presence was an anomaly they could no longer ignore. I saw my mother, Eleanor, shoot me a look of pure venom, while Serafina whispered something to her. their expressions a mixture of annoyance and confusion. They couldn't understand why I was still here, a stain on their perfect evening. My father simply pretended I didn't exist. At the center of the room, on a small elevated stage, Julian Croft was in his element. He was delivering a self-aggrandizing speech, his voice smooth and resonant as it flowed from the ship's state-of-the-art sound system. "And this partnership is more than just business," he pontificated, his arms spread wide. "It is a commitment to a stronger America. It is a tribute to the honor, the sacrifice, and the unwavering duty of the men and women of the United States Navy." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost poetic. He spoke of honor while standing on a desecrated grave. He spoke of sacrifice while being the one who had demanded it. From my vantage point, I could see my entire team in position. I was on the command deck of my own operation. Elias Vance stood near a service exit, his satellite phone already connected. A live, encrypted line open to a trusted contact at the Naval Investigative Command in Washington, D.C. He was our link to the outside world. Master Chief Mark Reyes was positioned near the ballroom's main power distribution panel, ready to reroute power or troubleshoot any physical override Croft's men might attempt. And tucked away in a small alcove, hidden behind a large potted plant, was Ensign Avery Park. Her face was illuminated by the glow of her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a dancer's grace. She was our digital warfare. I caught Avery's eye across the room. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Croft was building to his crescendo. "To those who serve," he declared, raising his glass, "we salute you." His voice was abruptly cut off. The sound system died with a sharp crackle. The massive video screen behind him, which had been displaying the shimmering logos of his company and the Cole family crest, went black. A collective gasp swept through the room. For a single, silent second, there was only confusion. Then the screen flickered back to life. It no longer showed a corporate logo. It showed the official seal of the United States Navy, and beneath it, in stark white block letters, were two words, USS Acheron. Before anyone could fully process what they were seeing, a sound erupted from the speakers. It wasn't music. It was the distorted, static-laced recording of a man's voice, a voice strained with urgency and disbelief. It was the voice of Captain Miller, pulled from the VDR's audio logs. "Siren protocol has been forcibly activated. This is not a drill. I am refusing the order. To anyone hearing this, do not trust them. Mayday, mayday, mayday." The audio cut out, leaving a ringing silence. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of shock and horror. Then the video began. It was grainy black and white footage from a security camera, time-stamped 6 years ago. It showed the bridge of the Acheron. It showed Captain Miller arguing with two of Croft's private security contractors. It showed them grabbing him, dragging him away from the command chair as he struggled. The room erupted in panicked whispers. The screen shifted. A flurry of documents, emails, and internal memos flashed across the screen, each one highlighted to show a single damning signature, J. Croft. An order to seize control of the vessel, a manifest of a new non-Navy crew, a bill of sale to a shell corporation. I watched their faces. Seraphina's jaw was hanging open, her perfect, curated world crumbling before her eyes. My mother's face was a mask of waxy, bloodless horror. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost, and my father, Admiral Donovan Cole, stood as if he had been turned to stone, his face a ruin of dawning, catastrophic realization. "Turn it off!" Julian Croft roared, his face purple with rage. "Security, turn it off now!" But it was too late. The final piece of evidence flashed on the screen. A direct wire transfer of $10 million from a Croft Dynamics subsidiary to a private account owned by my mother, Eleanor Cole, dated the week after the Acheron vanished. At that exact moment, the main doors to the ballroom burst open. They didn't swing, they were thrown open with force. The room was flooded with armed men in the uniforms of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. They moved with swift, disciplined precision, fanning out, securing the room. Outside the panoramic windows, the deep thrum of rotor blades filled the air as a Black Hawk helicopter descended, its searchlight cutting a stark white cone through the darkness and illuminating the deck. A female officer with Colonel's eagles on her collar strode to the center of the room, her voice cold and clear, cutting through the chaos. "Julian Croft," she announced, her eyes locking onto him. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States of America." 2 agents immediately seized Croft, who was sputtering, his face a mask of disbelief. The colonel then turned her steely gaze on my father. "Admiral Cole," she said, her voice devoid of any deference, "you will be coming with us for questioning regarding your role in this conspiracy. The world of the Cole family, the legacy my father had sacrificed everything to protect, collapsed into dust in the space of 30 seconds. As the agents led my father away, his eyes, wide with shock and betrayal, found mine across the room. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I just stood there, my expression unreadable, and held his gaze. My silence was my verdict. It was louder and more powerful than any sentence a judge could ever deliver. In the aftermath of the storm, an eerie silence descended upon the ship, now officially known once more as the USS Acheron. The chaos of the raid subsided, replaced by the quiet, methodical work of federal agents. The vessel, once a stage for glittering hypocrisy, was now a sterile crime scene. I stood on the deck, watching the last of the lavishly dressed guests being escorted off. The same people who had snubbed me just hours before now actively avoided my gaze, whispering amongst themselves as they scurried away, like rats from a sinking ship. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, hollow exhaustion, the kind a soldier feels after a long and brutal battle. The war was over, but the adrenaline had faded, leaving only the dull ache of the wounds behind. Serafina found me there, leaning against the railing. Her face was a mess of tears and ruined makeup, but her tears were not for the dead sailors or the dishonor. They were for her fallen empire. "You've ruined everything," she sobbed, her voice thick with selfish grief. "Our name, my restaurant, everything. Why couldn't you just keep quiet? Why do you always have to destroy everything?" I looked at my little sister, a woman who had spent her entire life basking in a warmth fueled by lies, and for the first time I felt nothing but a distant pity. "I didn't destroy it, Serafina," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It was already rotten from the inside. I just turned on the lights." My mother was next. An NCIS agent granted her a moment to speak with me before she was taken for questioning. She marched toward me, her face a mask of cold fury. There was no apology, no remorse. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You've dragged your father and this entire family through the mud, all for your own selfish pride. A good daughter would never have done this." I looked at this woman who had given me life, but had never given me love, and the last vestiges of a daughter's duty withered and died. A good mother would never ask her child to stay silent about a crime, ma'am, I replied, my voice level and cold. The word hung in the air between us, ma'am. It was the formal address of a subordinate to a superior officer, a stranger to a stranger. It was a wall, a final, unbreakable boundary. The connection was severed. In the midst of the quiet chaos, my true allies found me. Elias, Mark, and Avery approached. They didn't offer congratulations or platitudes. They didn't need to. Elias simply placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Mark handed me a bottle of water, a simple, practical gesture that spoke volumes. Avery gave me a nod of profound, earned respect. Their silent solidarity was a stronger fortress than any I had ever known. The commanding officer from NIC, a formidable woman named Colonel Ramirez, came over. She looked me straight in the eye, a soldier assessing another soldier. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," she said, her voice crisp and professional, "you did the right thing. You honored your oath. The Navy owes you a debt of gratitude." The words, so simple, so direct, landed with more weight than any medal I had ever received. They were a validation of the choice I had made. The path of a whistleblower, as people like Snowden and Manning had shown, is a lonely one. But in that moment, I knew I was not entirely alone. In the days that followed, as the Acheron was towed back to the naval base in Norfolk, the full weight of my decision settled in. The calls started, first from my family's lawyer. My father wanted to see me. I refused. Then came a long, rambling letter from my mother, a masterwork of guilt-tripping and blame. I didn't read it. I simply threw it away. I had spent a lifetime trying to break through the walls they had built around their hearts. Now I was building my own wall, not a wall of hatred, but a wall of self-respect. One morning, just before dawn, I stood alone on the bridge of the Acheron. The ship was quiet now, a silent metal ghost being guided home. I watched the first rays of sunlight paint the horizon in shades of gray and gold. I had lost the family I was born into, the one defined by blood and a name, but in doing so, I had finally found myself. They tried to erase a legacy, so I will write a new one. In the months that followed, the story of the USS Acheron became a national scandal. Elias Vance won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative series. Julian Croft and his key associates received life sentences. My father, Admiral Donovan Cole, was stripped of his rank and titles, facing a court-martial for his complicity. The legacy he had cherished above all else was reduced to ash. I didn't follow the trials. That battle was over. I had my own to fight. My small, struggling Chesapeake Bay Watchers program was thrust into the national spotlight. One morning, an email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "From the Pat Tillman Foundation." They had read my story. They saw a veteran who had continued to serve, and they were funding my entire program. Along with the grant came hundreds of letters from military families across the country, thanking me for giving a voice to the crew of the Acheron. I finally understood what Brené Brown meant when she wrote that vulnerability is not weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable, and in return, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. A year later, on a bright, breezy afternoon, we held a small ceremony at the docks. My chosen family was there. Mark, now my lead engineer, stood beside me. Elias and Avery, friends for life, stood in the small crowd. We were christening a newly refurbished training vessel, purchased with the Foundation's grant. I named her the TS Legacy. But this was a different kind of legacy. I didn't make a grand speech. I just said, "Legacy isn't your name on a wall. It's the hope you light in someone else's heart. As the small gathering broke up, Leo approached me. The defiant, angry boy was gone, replaced by a confident young man who now served as my first mate. He held out a small, hand-carved wooden plaque. On it were the words, Lieutenant Commander Hannah Cole, our captain. And beneath that, inscribed in careful letters, was the name of every single kid who had come through our program. Tears welled in my eyes as I took the simple, heartfelt gift. It was more precious than any medal, more meaningful than any promotion. It was the only honor that had ever truly mattered. The next morning, I stood at the helm of the Legacy, the sea breeze on my face, the warm morning sun on my back. A new group of kids, nervous and excited, were finding their stations. I was no longer looking back at the past. I was looking forward to the wide-open horizon. I began the roll call, my voice clear and steady in the morning air. Miller. Here, ma'am, a small boy piped up. Chen. Here, a teenage girl responded, a smile on her face. I called out each name and each one answered, their voice full of promise. I was no longer the shadow, the name that was omitted. I was the one calling the names, the one who saw them, the one who acknowledged them. I was the lighthouse. With a steady hand, I steered the ship forward, cutting a clean wake through the calm waters of the bay, heading toward a future I had built myself, a legacy forged not from betrayal, but from healing. My story isn't just about a ghost ship or a broken family. It's about the legacy we choose to build when the one we were given falls apart. It's about finding our own crew, our own why, and our own dawn. Each of us has a story of resilience, a quiet battle we've fought. I've shared mine with you, and now I'd love to hear yours. Share your own story of overcoming in the comments below, because every story shared is another lighthouse in the dark. For more stories that inspire and empower, be sure to subscribe to Chosen Revenge.